I am Nicholas.
Hi, and welcome to TiddlyWiki Hangout 77. I'm Jeremy Ruston, the creator of TiddlyWiki, and I'm joined on today's Hangout by, well, starting on the left of my screen by Ed. Ed, would you like to say hi, introduce yourself, say where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Sure. My name is Ed Dixon. I'm in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And I'm hoping to try to adapt XAPI, TinCan, with TiddlyWiki for an educational workbook. And I'm really excited about it. XAPI has a training session coming up, and I'm looking to try to get some tiddlers with me. You know what I mean? Get some of our brain space in there and see what we can do with this, because I think it's a great opportunity to take it to the next step. You know, and I hope to have some people join me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ed. Thank you very much for joining us. I've made a note about discussing TinCan in the agenda. Next, Jim. Hi. Would you like to say hello, where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah. From Jefferson City, Missouri, which is in the United States, obviously. I am using TiddlyWiki right now to try and create static websites, and I think it'd be a good authoring tool for that. So I've written a couple plugins around that, the Atom feed and the sitemap XML generator plugins, and am interested in using it mostly under Node. I actually have it set up now where I'm running Node on both Linux and Windows. And so the other thing I've been doing is, like the bug fix I put in for this last release on case-insensitive file systems, is trying to make sure that Windows is a first-class citizen, even though Linux has my heart.
Indeed, your work on the static site stuff has been much appreciated, Jim. Perhaps if we've got time, it might be cool to ask you to do a brief demo, just to, because I'm sure for people who aren't used to working with the Node version, the static site stuff will seem quite alien. We've just been joined by Branimir, who's come on the extreme left of my list. So I'm going to say hello, Branimir, and ask you to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and something about your work with TiddlyWiki. Assuming you've got a microphone, Branimir. No, possibly Branimir doesn't have a microphone.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can. Brilliant. Hi, Branimir. How are you doing?
Sorry for being late. I was in a hurry to get here. My name is Branimir. I'm from Sofia, Bulgaria. I'm using TiddlyWiki for more than 3 years now, transferring everything from Classic to TiddlyWiki 5. I'm trying to contribute with just ideas and looking at TiddlyWiki from a user perspective mainly.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, Branimir. And next, in this slightly chaotic order, it's Mario. Would you like to say hi, Mario? And introduce yourself, etc.
From Austria, near Salzburg. I'm contributor to TiddlyWiki Classic and TiddlyWiki 5, did the German translation. Yeah, that's it.
Hi, Mario. Great you could join us. And Nick, joining us, I think, for the second time. Would you like to say hello, introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Yeah, I'm Nicholas Spies. My career was spent as a video editor. I authored a book on Forth, so I have some computer programming experience. And I only ran into, the story behind my getting involved with TiddlyWiki is a couple of years old, but I really only started using it about 6 weeks ago or so, 2 months at the max. I was recommended by a person who wrote a variant of APL called K and a database called K+. That's used by quants in, quantitative analysts in large financial institutions. And it's used quite widely, even though it's interpreted. Apparently the databases can stretch 1 million records wide and several million deep, and still get some kind of decent performance, which is as I say, widely used within the financial industry. Well, I looked at the documentation for K because I used J, which is a Iverson's answer to APL, but in ASCII. And so I was interested in K because Arthur Whitney had written that, and he's an incredible programmer. One of his people suggested TiddlyWiki as a note-taking tool with which to write up updated manual for their program. And when I delved into it, I realized that I did not have the wherewithal to write this book at this time. And I put aside TiddlyWiki, and then I kind of refound it, and it's literally been only 2 months or something that I've been actively working in it.
And indeed, you've been quite an enthusiastic newcomer with driving a lot of discussion recently. And more recently, there's been your work on revised developer documentation, which we'll be talking about a little later. Tobias, would you like to say hello, introduce yourself, say where you're from in the usual fashion?
Yeah, hello, I'm Tobias from Leipzig, Germany, and I've been contributing to the TiddlyWiki community via little, well, instruction, how do you say, what's it called?
Community documentation.
Community documentation, let's call it like that, yeah. Like gathering the little bits from the groups and putting them in an organized place, maybe. And also recently starting more and more to do a little bit more contributions to the core and see how that goes. And yeah, also some plugin construction sites all scattered all over the place. Yeah, so.
Indeed, Toby's been an incredibly central member of the TiddlyWiki Classic community, drawing together a lot of the community resources around tiddlywiki.org, and has now started doing the same phenomenal job for TiddlyWiki 5. And before we've looked at Toby's tb5.tiddlyspot.com, that is correct, collection of hints and tips, and Toby puts us all to shame by basically whenever he learns anything new on the group, bang, he makes a modification to tb5.tiddlyspot.com, which is awesome to see, and it puts me to shame because my goal has always been to do the same thing with the actual documentation, and I don't always manage it. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me today. Obviously, I've been away for a couple of weeks. We've had a gap of missing 2 Hangouts. That means that I'm behind. I have a backlog, which I'm always bleating about my backlog in these Hangouts. But it basically, there was a whole load of, I came back to a lot of pull requests on GitHub, issues on GitHub, and posts to the mailing list. Most of that stuff I've scanned as it came in and read, but I haven't been in a position to reply until the last couple of days, and now I'm slowly working through things. My current status is that I've worked through all of the pull requests and merged the ones that could be immediately merged, and raised the necessary comments and so on for the ones that need additional work. I'm starting to work my way through the issue updates since then, and now I'm roughly keeping pace with new posts to the discussion group. So if there's something that anybody that you're anxious to get a reply from me for on the discussion groups, then don't be afraid to bump it up by posting another reply, and that'll help me to prioritize the things that I need to pay attention to. But what I meant to say first actually was how incredibly lucky I feel to come back from holiday to such a backlog. I mean, what I came back to was an enormous amount of mental energy that has been expended by a large number of people, which has the effect not only of keeping TiddlyWiki going in my absence, but also taking us much further forwards on a number of fronts. In terms of pull requests, Toby and Astrid particularly have been very productive. Astrid's done masses more documentation work on the filter stuff. Toby's fingers have been in pies all over TiddlyWiki, but really terrific to see. I mean, those making contributions is quite tough. There's quite a tough bar to getting things into the core and so on. And I just wanted to point out how much I really appreciate the fact that there are other people putting work into this besides me. And in fact, on the discussion groups, in a lot of cases, I now don't need to reply to certain threads because other people have given better answers than I could. And so again, I'm very grateful to everybody for taking the trouble to pipe up that. Okay, so now we've got because of that backlog, there must also be an enormous backlog of things to discuss. So what I was going to try to do, mindful of the time, was to go fairly swiftly through the topics that I've got written down. That means we won't necessarily be able to do justice to them all, but in several cases they're topics that have been raised before and we haven't been able to address. So my suggestion is that we first ask Ed to talk about the TinCan API, give us a very brief introduction to his what he's been posting about that. Then we'll discuss that and then move on to some questions raised by Nick. But Ed, is this a good point for you to just tell us briefly why TinCan is cool and why we should care?
Cool. Well, the thing I like about TinCan is that it's a new version of the SCORM format, which was the shareable content object resource model that a lot of e-learning was based around for a lot of years. TinCan is a big update to that. And what they've done is they kind of threw out the whole book and they redesigned this thing in a way that's much more flexible and could be used extremely well with an offline learning environment based around TiddlyWiki. What I'm seeing is like TiddlyWiki with video, textual content, things that the student needs, tools that the teacher can use in there, and then the ability with TinCan would allow that book to be able to report the student's progress and the work that the student's doing from the book to a learning resource center or to a learning management system or whatever system they may have to track that work online when online is available. So this becomes a tool that could be used very well for the X Prize competition that's going on that several people are involved in, or just as a general learning tool, which is what I hope to create with it. But I'm taking it slow. I'm looking forward to XAPI has got a training camp. It's a 3-month program starting, well, the registration I think is this Friday. And it's a 1 hour per week commitment. And I would love to get some better programmers in there than myself to help with this. But one way or another, we've got a small group formed up, and we're going in there 1 hour a week for the next 3 months to learn how to best adopt XAPI, and hopefully come out with a plugin that our other Tiddlers here can take advantage of, and hopefully do some good for education. So that's what I'm working towards.
So let me just check that I understand that the role of TinCan in the computerized learning universe is as the register of a learner's performance. So it's the place where it's the central registry of how people are doing against their learning objectives, training materials, etc.
Right, it can be. It's very, very flexible. It's set up on a noun-verb type system to where you can pretty much just define what it is that you want to track and how you want to track it. So it's like, okay, the student read this, the student did this, and then it sends that information out to a database where it's recorded.
So it's but its area of concern is this secure keeping of records. It's not concerned with presenting educational materials, for instance.
Right. Yeah. There are other people are doing a great job towards that. You know what I mean? Now this would just be a way to track those
Yeah, it's
efforts.
very focused on this one job of writing stuff to a server, making sure that it's been accepted by the server, presumably there's sort of error handling and so on. And then you're suggesting that the optimal goal would be for people to be able to work on learning tasks within an offline TiddlyWiki, for it to record their status locally offline, and then to be able to update via the TinCan API the central registry with those changes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the vision. And also with the TiddlyWiki, it's got the ability, like as a student's watching a video, and say at one point he starts to take a note, we could record that with a timestamp, and that provides feedback both to the student and to the teacher as far as to what that student's finding is informational, good material from the video he's watching. That would be one example of a lot of integration I can think of.
Okay, and that's an example then of capturing signals from the users, from the learners' activities, so that one can measure things like, I guess, engagement in the material, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so we looked before in a previous Hangout at the nature of the API, and as I recall, it's gratifyingly a really nice, clean, RESTful web API that it appears that it does things in very much the conventional way, and so it's as straightforward for us to call that API as it is the TiddlyWeb API, which is the one web API that TiddlyWiki 5 already interacts with. So I think I can see at least the low level of how integration could be accomplished, as in how we could make calls to the TinCan API from within TiddlyWiki. But there's a lot of topics that will need some fairly careful deliberation. I know that Mario in the past has talked about this vexed topic of how trustworthy self-reported statistics like this can be. Could I tamper with my offline TiddlyWiki to make it look like I'd done a number of things, and to what extent do we want to guard against, detect, or protect that? So there's lots of issues that I think you've already anticipated to getting a decent integration going. And I guess that's maybe where this did you describe it as a bootcamp comes in?
That's they call it a cohort, and it's a 3-month program where they talk about best uses and practices, as I understand it, with the XAPI integration.
And is it run on Google Hangouts or something?
Well, the initial meeting this Friday is going to be over WebEx.
Okay.
And I think we're supposed to form our own cohort groups and work together as a group from that point forward. I think just integrating with them maybe once a week or something.
I see. Okay. Well, in terms of attending these things, I assume in the posting to the group you put the details of Friday's opening meeting. And does attendance at Friday's meeting imply commitment to the remainder of the 3 months?
Yeah, that one is over the WebEx, and at that point they can sign up for the program if they want. It's completely free. You know what I mean? And of course they can back out at any time they want to as well. So yeah. It's not it's not a life or death commitment or anything. It's just kind of that's where the program kind of starts, I guess.
Cool. Well, and have you had any interest from the discussion in the groups?
A little bit. Not so much in the group. There hasn't been a lot come back to me, but I have had some. Rich seems interested. There's some from outside of our community that are interested that are also coming in. Carl, a good teacher, a good friend of mine, has some previous experience with TiddlyWiki. Carl Husa, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but anyway, he should be there. It looks like we've got about 5 or 6 so far.
Okay. And I'm not sure if any of those people have experience of this kind of plugin or this kind of development work. But there's a few people on the call here who, judging by their previous work for TiddlyWiki and TiddlyWiki Classic, might well be of assistance. Looking at you, Nathan, Mario, Toby, possibly Branimir.
Absolutely. Man,
Jim, actually.
Tobias, DJ, you guys, man, it would be great to have one of y'all in there to help us. That would be awesome.
Well, what time is Friday's meeting? I'll have a look, and if I can come along to Friday's meeting, I will do so.
Great. It's let me look at the details here. Let's see. Where'd it go? Of course, I don't know how this is going to translate to your area.
I know, I'm very good at time zone calculations in my head.
Let's see. According to the website, it's going to be January 30th, 10 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, which is my time, Mountain Standard.
Okay, so that's 8 hours, I think.
No, I'm 5, so he's 3 more, yeah, 8.
So Mountain Standard, you're 9:31, so it's 7 hours behind me. So your 10 o'clock would be 1700, which would be 5 o'clock. Yes, that's right. It would be half an hour's time, in fact, wouldn't it? Okay, I'm not sure whether I will be able to make that time. I will check and try to attend if I can.
Right. Well, man, can we use your help? That'd be awesome.
I think the thing that sounds like an interesting opportunity is just partly prompted by what you said, partly prompted by scanning the documentation in the background, is to the degree that it's a general purpose store, it might be possible to quite quickly do some work that uses it as a general purpose store, that for instance makes it so that certain types of tiddlers are synchronized with the TinCan API instead of being synchronized to TiddlyWeb. I do still think there's a bunch of work to then take that basic integration and turn it into something that's educationally useful, but aware that that first bit is probably the area where I can most usefully contribute as well.
Oh man, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, up to say, I may have a problem with 5 o'clock, in which case, I'm sure we can find other ways for me to help.
With our team meetings, because we're supposed to have like a 1 hour per week, I think, team meetings.
Okay.
And we can set those up for whatever time works for us, and we can use Hangouts. And, yeah.
Okay. Well, that may well perhaps be the thing to book after Friday's meeting then. Cool. But obviously, I'll leave all that with you. Thank you very much, Ed. The thing I was going to touch on next was one of several topics raised by Nick, and this is about the developer documentation. So, tiny introduction to the topic, and for that I'm just sharing my screen. The present situation is that the developer documentation is organized. It's still a bunch of material taken from a master's assignment by these two German students, Christian Jerk and Christian Heigl, who did a really astonishingly complete introduction to TiddlyWiki's internals, which I adopted quite early on as the basis for the dev documentation, simply because it is pretty complete. I've not managed to do any refactoring of this documentation, so there's a bit of a mismatch between this material, for instance, which was mostly written by me, but with not all by me, I hasten to add, but written especially for dev, along with the differences in style with this material compared to the material from the assignment that Christian and Christian did. So what Nick has been doing is refactoring the documentation. Nick, I'll ask you to explain, but the areas that immediately jump out is Nick has gone for a kind of outline style where much of the material is split into hierarchical bullet points. This opening tiddler that comes up when you open Nick's material, the introduction, actually becomes a discussion of how that material could be automatically created from constituent tiddlers. But when you poke around, you see that, in fact, Nick has written much material about almost every aspect of TiddlyWiki's internal operations. So I'm guessing, Nick, this is the result of many late nights spent reading the code. Is that right?
Well, actually, just reading the documentation, and then reading the code of the documentation to try to explicate it, and then changing the drawings to what you see on the screen there, using Inkscape, and trying to improve them, make them more readable, and so forth and so on. But I'd like to relate a story. I grew up on a farm, and you know, a hot summer day, you would go into the spring house and lean down to the water to take a drink, and find yourself putting your head in the water because the water was so clear. Well, that's my vision for what documentation should be. It should be absolutely so transparent that anyone can understand it. And as a kind of a guiding principle, so it may be like there's a tremendous amount of white space and it looks like perhaps poetry almost, but I think that it is very, very easily scannable and accessible, and should incorporate, in fact, the user documentation as well as the documentation for developers. They could be two modes or whatever, but the same material ought to be included all in one document, in my opinion.
Indeed. So I think there's the goals, the ambitions that you just articulated for the developer documentation, I would wholeheartedly agree with. More than that, I've found that writing the documentation for TiddlyWiki.com that's aimed at users is necessarily, for me, is quite difficult because one has to simplify TiddlyWiki. You know, the goal there is to make TiddlyWiki tractable for newcomers. Yeah, whereas the thing that I love about the developer documentation is it gives us the possibility of a top-down technical description or bottom-up technical description of how TiddlyWiki behaves. And I think for some people, even if they're never going to develop with TiddlyWiki, I think that style of documentation is much better. So that's the first sort of tentative conclusion that I have from reviewing your work, and it's that the at the moment we draw the line between the developer documentation and the normal documentation by whether you need to be a JavaScript developer to understand it. I still think that's quite a useful distinction because people know whether or not they know JavaScript, if you see what I mean. So it's easy for people to decide whether the material is for them. But I think what your experiments are indicating, and my own desire to sort of write an unvarnished description of TiddlyWiki's mechanisms, is that actually maybe the target is a little bit looser than that. Maybe the target audience is technical people, people who, technical in the sense of people who are comfortable with a certain type of technical bottom-up explanation. You know, so. Well,
I mean, I wrote a book about computer language, so
yes.
In a sense, I was addressing that audience myself.
Yes, exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah. So, one of the things that I've learned with all the documentation that we do is that as we decide on policies like this, we need to write them down and record them so that it's easier for other people to contribute by seeing what the rules are, so to speak. So we've got some quite controversial material on TiddlyWiki.com, which is about that. It's about things like how should we form the titles of tiddlers on TiddlyWiki.com, the title policy. And in the same way, I think it's very appropriate for the dev wiki to have material about who, to be explicit about who the target audience is.
Yeah.
We've still got plenty more to say about what Nick's done, but there's comments in the sidebar, and I'm going to try this time to turn to those so that I don't get we don't get too far out of sync. Jim was pointing out it'd be good to have a way to generate API docs from GitHub source code. Absolutely agree. That's something I talked about before, using to produce something like underscores annotated source code. And the plan, and we did this early on in TiddlyWiki's life, TiddlyWiki 5's life, was to have a JavaScript parser so that we could present the source code with the comments extracted and formatted as wiki text. So yes, that's an outstanding piece of work I'd very much like to do. Nathan's questioning the point about whether people know whether or not they're a JavaScript developer, pointing out that his better half writes JavaScript snippets all day, but doesn't actually consider herself to be a JavaScript developer. So it's a good point. I would think, again, it suggests that we need to shift this notion of being a JavaScript developer to something more about being, say, technical, but that's really not a great word, but people who are comfortable with a more technical explanation.
Well, but then again, I'm sorry, excuse me.
Tony, can you enable Nathan? Sorry, you did it already. Well, Rich, I think Rich is not enabled yet.
No, I've enabled Rich. Hello, Rich, and hello, Nathan. In fact, should we just pause for a further second and ask Nathan and Rich to introduce themselves? Nathan, would you like to say hello, where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Me?
Nathan. Assuming Nathan's got a microphone. Nathan has dropped out, so I think doesn't have a microphone. Rich, would you like to do the same, to introduce yourself, say where you're from, and say something about your work with TiddlyWiki?
Hey everybody, my name is Rich Shoemaker, and I'm here in Los Angeles, California, and I'm a TiddlyWiki enthusiast. I use it a lot, and I really enjoy it.
Indeed, and I've been a prodigious member of the community recently, and by the simple act of asking questions, Rich has triggered some excellent work, I think, from me and other people on the group. So great to have you here, Rich, as well. So we're just talking about developer documentation. I wanted to keep moving fairly quickly, actually. So the next part of the discussion is really about how to action what Nick started to kick off. So the first thing is that the material I showed you is currently in a GitHub repository. I've suggested to Nick that he put it up on TiddlySpot so that it's easier for other people to refer to it as well. Then we do have a separate discussion group for documentation discussions. It's called TiddlyWiki Docs. I have a horrible feeling I may not be linking to it from TiddlyWiki.com, but you will find references to it, I think, in the main TiddlyWiki group if you're trouble finding it. And I think that's probably the best place for us to continue these discussions about the target audience for the development, for the developer documentation, etc. There's one. Nick, sorry, do carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. I feel that doing it in the manner that I've done could be done algorithmically. So it would introduce a great deal of consistency.
Okay, so this was the topic that I wanted to briefly cover, actually, which is that Nick's work includes a lot of documentation material, but it also includes this novel way of formatting it. I'm truly not certain, Nick, whether I prefer this or a more conventional narrative way of laying out the text. But I am rather thinking this documentation isn't for me. And so that's something I'd think it would be very good to get some other opinions on, both here and in the TiddlyWiki docs group. Because if we do change the style of the documentation to this outline style, it's a big job. You know, we need to, we aspire to the development documentation being consistent, and you know that means doing it consistently across all the documentation that we have. Equally, I can see that you have done this work for an awful lot of the material that's on in the wiki, but then it also strikes me when I was looking through it that actually to convert it back into a narrative style would again, I mean, could probably be done algorithmically again, but it's even done manually, it wouldn't be an overwhelming amount of work. So I wanted to, I think we need to address that point of do we want to make this switch to the outline style pretty, you know, before we can figure out where we're going to go with the material that you produced at the moment. One possibility is that, you know, that style to me looks like a presentation. You know, it's and there's good reasons why presentations use, even though bullet points, you know, it's supposed to be the worst type of presentation when you're, but still, there's a good reason why people use bullet points in slides rather than full narrative paragraphs. It makes it much easier for the eye to scan, to sort of see where you are in the material.
Yeah, it brings the question up, can you suppress the bullets?
Yes, that's a simple bit of CSS. You set the list style to none. And I'm sorry, I did see you asking that question, but this is the kind of thing that I'm still backlogged about, and I would have to. But in fact, you can, if you do an inspect element on the table of contents in the sidebar on tiddlywiki.com, you'll see the necessary CSS because the bullet points are suppressed.
Ken, is there a link to this developer documentation?
Yes, unfortunately, it's not necessarily let me. Nick, can you post a link? I'm just trying to find it, but
can I what?
Can you post a link to your GitHub repo? I've got it here now, don't worry. So I'm just posting to the chat window github.com/nicholas-spies/twdoc for dev, and what you'll find, Mario, is that in that repo there's an HTML file. So that's one of the topics that we brushed over early on, is that in order for this stuff to be turned into a pull request, obviously GitHub needs to be used slightly differently. Toby is just saying in the sidebar, I think this should be as much narrative as we can afford, so long as it doesn't end up in the distro and so long as it helps improve explorability in terms of relating coding concepts. The code documentation, I'm meaning the documentation that's in the comments of the code and extracting that. So there's certainly, I'm no fan of putting large amounts of documentation in the code, but I do find that the only hope I've got of keeping code documentation up to date is if it's part of the comments of the code. So next step, Nick, would be to post that to TiddlySpot and make a posting to the TiddlyWiki docs group. Anything else on developer documentation?
No, not that should be handled here. I mean,
okay. the Rich pointed out in the sidebar that Astrid has been doing an amazing job with documentation updates, and that's helped him a lot. And I've already mentioned Astrid's updates, but would again like to emphasize what a brilliant job Astrid is doing. She's not only churning out excellent quality text, but there's the scaffolding behind it in terms of the mindful adoption of new terminology and so on, that's giving us much better structure, much more consistency. And I certainly find, when you're working with somebody like Astrid with those qualities, that it helps to keep me on my toes as well. And I think, like Tobias with the rapid updates to tb5.tiddlyspot.com, Astrid's doing a great job of demonstrating how it should be done. Okay.
I would add this, that it really is just a mind-opening entree into a different approach, and I wouldn't consider going any further than this without a general consensus.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the thing is, I think your work is valuable. It takes lots of voices to document something as big and sort of nebulous as TiddlyWiki. So, I mean, if we, even if it doesn't, or even if only some of what you've done is used as a contribution to tiddlywiki.com/dev, what I really hope that you would continue work on independent documentation as well, as Toby does. And this model of developing stuff around the edges and then pulling it into the center as and when we can is terrific. But you will, I mean, as you say, you're proposing radical changes, and I think there's a whole load of work from minor fixes through to those radical changes. But my God, we do need radical changes to the way that we do developer documentation. So to be clear, contributions in this area are very, very welcome indeed. Okay, now
Jeremy, one word. When I started to work with TiddlyWiki, there was tiddlywiki.org, and I was no JavaScript developer at all. So I had no idea about HTML. I had no idea about JavaScript. I knew different other languages, starting from basic to assembler. But I think whatever documentation you can get at the very beginning is valuable. And if you have different points of view to the same source, then you get different points, and then you get your own big picture. So for TiddlyWiki Classic, there was Eric's interactive, how is it, Inside TiddlyWiki or something like this, where you could search for different code snippets and all this stuff, which was very valuable. With TiddlyWiki 5, it's the editor that is very valuable for me because of the global search. And then for the documentation, I think it's quite nice to have different point of views about the developer documentation, because everything everything that is intended to give you a big picture about the concept and all this stuff is important.
I appreciate that. It would be very nice to know what this constellation of different documentation efforts is, such that we could conjoin our efforts into a cohesive document.
And I'm old school. I would love to see something similar to MDN, Mozilla Developer Network JavaScript documentation for all of the external wiki API / widget stuff, so that there's just a set of, hey, I go here, here's the parameters, here's the side effects, here's all of that. And I think that you can do algorithmically with the right header comments on all the methods and stuff in the GitHub repo.
Yes, exactly that, Jim. That's exactly what I mean.
But it's a good code editor goes a long way already. So if you have something that's really designed to edit code, then yeah, you have a good starting point.
That's true. You're, I think, reminding us that in terms of the explorability of TiddlyWiki code, there's not much that can beat downloading a zip of the repo and dragging that folder into an editor and being able to do global searches and so on.
I guess there's no JavaScript equivalent to what Knuth has done with his literate programming paradigm.
Well, let me show you what there is. So this is just me talking again about the underscore documentation, but it's a great example. So you go to underscore.js, you get normal sort of API documentation. This is the annotated source, and if I compare it to underscore.js, you can see that okay, there's a comment establish the root object window in the browser or exports on the server, and you can see here how that's been hoiked across and formatted in Wikitext so that we get a code typeface for the words window and exports. So it's this, in fact, in the hands of TiddlyWiki, this could go, I think, in some ways further than Knuth, because we've got hyperlinks between chunks of code. So you could imagine clicking on references to other code modules and automatically jumping there. And of course, we can easily incorporate diagrams and so on. So that is something that I'm very attracted to, doing that. Yes, would be in the similar way thinking about Knuth, and also kicking my past self for not writing enough comments and documentation when I was writing the code in the first place. But that's the relationship I have with my past self, sadly. Nathan, are you microphoned? Are you able to say hello? I think Nathan is mute, sadly. Okay, so there was only a couple more things on my list, and okay, let me screen share again to deal with one of them. So I at the last Hangout at the beginning of the month drew attention to a post in the discussion group by Neil Griffin, where I'd emphasize this passage, that Neil was questioning the assumption that we have made in the community a lot of the time, that TiddlyWiki should present itself as an easy-to-use tool for everybody in the same manner as Evernote. Whereas, in fact, perhaps that doesn't sell TiddlyWiki well, because, and Neil's got this marvelous formula where he's saying you've got the number of people who are trying TiddlyWiki, the probability of them sticking with TiddlyWiki, and the benefit that they perceive when they use it. And he's pointing out that if we target a low-tech audience, A is very large, but B and C tend to be really small. But if we target the smaller but still substantial technical audience, then we've got a much smaller A, but B and C are much higher. So in other words, people with some kind of technical bent, the kind of people who I don't know, still failing to come up with good words to characterize them, but the kind of people that Evernote is not hitting is the best I can do at the moment. So I last time drew attention to that post, so I really like it. It speaks to a mistake that I think I've been a party to a few times with TiddlyWiki, which to say is to try and make it look conventional. And so, TiddlyWiki has some unusual characteristics, and when you try to compare TiddlyWiki to other things that seem similar, like Evernote and so on, it can seem embarrassing that TiddlyWiki has these sort of lumpy characteristics. And Neil posted a follow-up, which is here, roughly making the case again that we've got to focus our effort not just in documentation, but in TiddlyWiki itself. And it's thought-provoking for me, because there are a bunch of things that I've done to TiddlyWiki that are intended to make it easier for casual users to get started with it. Not at all clear whether they've succeeded. And again, making this point that is user-friendliness actually the goal, a reasonable goal, when to get the most out of TiddlyWiki seems to be centered around taking advantage of the opportunity to customize it, which immediately moves you outside of a kind of straightforward, user-friendly presentation. So I don't know. I wanted to raise this not because I've got any specific actions arising, but I think it's a useful backdrop for these discussions that we keep having about the documentation, and both the developer documentation and the end user documentation. And it's really it's that maybe we need to focus a bit more on trying to figure out what TiddlyWiki is, what's precious and useful about it to most of the people who are finding it useful, and how best can we put that across, rather than sort of possibly making the risk of promising something as easy to use as Evernote, and therefore hiding the special capabilities of TiddlyWiki. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, Jeremy, this is Rich.
Hi, Rich.
I found a spreadsheet and created a TED TiddlyWiki, and I was watching TED number 7 from 2008, and they showed how user-friendliness in Word had gone to such a limit that literally the screen for typing in words on an entire screen was about 1 inch by 3 or 4 inches, because they had added so many user features through toolbars and things like that. And I started to think about how easy and quick everything is inside TiddlyWiki, and how, yes, you have a curve to learn, but once you do learn, it's so much faster.
Yes, I've seen people carefully decline the difference between easy to learn and easy to use. And maybe that's our slogan. Is to be proud to be hard to learn, but proud also to be easy to use once you have.
I've always felt strongly its strongest feature is its flexibility. The fact that you can mold this thing to do whatever you need it to do is incredible. And it can do it natively in any browser. That's HTML5 compatible. That to me is its greatest point.
Indeed, and which I think is a version of saying it's the customizability, the deep customizability that's useful, and yet again to take advantage of that customizability seems like it's not a user-friendly thing. I mean, we've moved out of the domain of user-friendly software.
I also think so. If you have a look at the web, if there is a new user service popping up for, I don't know, to-do lists or taking notes and saving it in the cloud, then you think, okay, I can do this with TiddlyWiki. So there is absolutely no difference. So and I think this is the important point, that you have so many different possibilities that there is no clear focus. So all these new services that pop up,
they're very special purpose, but a general purpose tool like TiddlyWiki.
A backend. So they are only useful if you have internet connectivity, internet connection. And TiddlyWiki is just a file, and you download it, and you're done. And I think this is really the biggest advantage. So the single file behavior of TiddlyWiki. So there are some drawbacks, but there is also a very big advantage.
To pile on here, I think besides the customizability of it, one of the reasons I like running it under Node is then I get all the tiddlers as nice little text files that I could post-process and get out if I decide, hey, I don't like you guys, I want to move on. In a pretty clean format, and to me, that's also part of it.
Yes, I'm quite interested in the way that, so it was obviously an explicit goal with TiddlyWiki 5 was to try and be developer friendly. So TiddlyWiki Classic wasn't very friendly for conventional developers. It's turned out that TiddlyWiki 5, in another sense, isn't very friendly for people who have prior experience of programming with the DOM. But the Node.js side was, yes, it was absolutely intended to answer to those sort of concerns, wanting to store your stuff in portable text files, wanting to have a good deal of control over individual items. But it's funny how that's, I think, a very distinct audience than the single file audience. So one of the things that I've seen on the group a lot is people who have a good deal of resistance of moving from the single file edition to the Node edition. And obviously that's a perfectly valid perspective. There's lots that's special about the single file edition. But I think what I've seen is people installing and running Node.js takes them far outside their usual comfort zone. And maybe this is one of the things that's subliminally driven some of the confusion with the documentation, that there's always been these two audiences. So in the past, I've tried to serve the needs of people who are already familiar with Node.js and Git with the material that appears when you go to the TiddlyWiki 5 repo. So the README file in the repo is automatically generated from content that's also on tiddlywiki.com, and that's intended to be a sensible pathway for those users. But I think it's kind of hidden. So for somebody with your predilections, Jim, if you stumbled on tiddlywiki.com, it wouldn't be at all obvious, I think. You'd have to be paying quite close attention to understand that, to learn that there was a Node.js version, and that therefore there was a manifestation of the product that speaks to your needs.
One, actually, are we silent, or can you hear me?
Oh no, I can hear you. So you should be able to see on your avatar. You'll see a little flashing series of green dots. That basically means Google hears you. And then sometimes if we don't hear you, that's because our connection to Google's broken. But Google is hearing you.
Yeah, it's strange. Since you've written a intermediate language of macros and filters and so forth and so on, it suggests almost that it might be useful to write a more generalized language that is not so idiosyncratic as JavaScript, and yet would be and also would be much more accessible to lower down users.
Yes. So there's I think that TiddlyWiki already incorporates a domain-specific language, which is Wikitext. So with the tree, the widget tree is pretty much a peculiar kind of virtual machine for running programs. And at the moment, there's a bunch of things that users can do by writing and manipulating those programs. And then I think this is kind of what you're saying, is that they have to drop down into JavaScript to work on the primitives.
The guts.
So, yeah, and I think there's a couple of things there that I would be very happy if we had more of a Forth-like feel, where there were rather fewer. There was another layer of primitives, basically, that were lower level, still written in native JavaScript, but that those primitives be combined to produce the familiar ones like macros and widgets and so on. Yes, and there was a second part to what you said, but let me just let Nathan in.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and the second aspect of this was there is, I think, also scope for us to support a completely different high-level language, such as Lisp or Scheme. Those it was quite good that we just had those discussions about whether we need to be easy to use, because obviously adopting Lisp or Scheme would move us straight into a fairly specific direction. But yes, those are appealing ideas.
TiddlyWiki already has let's say, its own language, as you say. There is the wiki text, and then there is the widgets and macros. And let's say widgets are the very basic, let's say, standard user low-level functionality, and macros are high-level functionality. And I think at the moment we are at the level where, for example, Tobias creates the macros, and he creates some suggestions how can this high-level macros look like. Using the low level. At the moment, let's say most of the users are still early adopters, and we learned to use the widgets. But now I think it's the time of changing, where there are coming some macros that are really useful, and they are easier to use for standard users. But I think it will need some time until we have enough macros that widgets are gone for standard users or for new users.
Can I just say one very quick thing, sorry Nick, about what Mario said, was that you were talking about the layers of TiddlyWiki there, I think. I really like that kind of conceptual delineation of the territory within TiddlyWiki, and it's something I'd really like to see diagrammed, because I find that it's something I talk about from time to time. Tobias, I think this came up with one of the changes that you'd proposed while I'd been away, where the proposal was to fix something by modifying an existing widget, and my question was whether we could fix it at a higher layer by fixing some of the core templates. And I think that's one of the interesting aspects of TiddlyWiki's design that's really not well captured. A lot of the material, the existing dev material, takes a more kind of functional blocks perspective. The reason why I emphasize that is because you guys are as good at producing diagrams like that as me, particularly you, Nick. So any diagrams in that area for discussion, be really grateful. Let me break briefly to say hello to Danielo. Hi Danielo, how are you doing? If Danielo has a microphone today. Danielo, I'm assuming you don't have a microphone. I'll give you a few minutes, but do interrupt when if you do get yourself a microphone.
Could I?
Nick, sorry, I should let you continue.
Yeah, I wanted to, even though you kind of nixed the idea, share. Now, am I sharing something?
Oh, you're sharing CDF player, yeah. So okay, do Nick. This is so there are two external tools that Nick has mentioned to me recently.
Yeah.
One is this CDF player for Mathematica, and one is Frink. And
This
they're
is,
both things that would be attractive to integrate with TiddlyWiki.
yeah, this is a bronze by a sculptor friend of mine, a late friend of mine. I don't know whether you can see it well because it's not very well lit. There.
Okay. Yes.
And I realized that in Mathematica, this is a solid bronze, so it's rather heavy, and I don't want to get it all fingerprinted. So anyway, you can see it's kind of a shape that almost it defies your imagination what it could be possibly composed of. So I made a Mathematica file, which I brought up. What is it? The second button on the side? Yes. This file, if I can succeed in pushing the right button, there, share. Oh, yeah, that's it. Are you seeing it full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you can actually rotate this. Now, to see what it's actually composed of in terms of geometric or 3D geometric components, change the opacity of the middle components, revealing two stacks of tetrahedra. Whereas if you go the other way, you can see that there are, in the middle, two octahedra. Now, the gentleman who did this, Robinson Friedenthal, whose father was an author, whose sister, or a painter, and his sister was a painter, had Parkinson's from his 20s onwards, so his motion was very impaired. So he made models of these things in cardboard, and this is an example of a lost cardboard method of casting. At any rate, my idea, since there's a site on the University of Pennsylvania site, because he studied with Louis Kahn, the architect there, was to, and still is, to have a variety of models like this that sort of explicate his thought processes. And I thought how wonderful it would be, because these things are web embeddable, to have it embedded in TiddlyWiki. But Jeremy's objection to that was that it required an external player, which I accept, just on the face of it. So I'm not arguing with that. But,
well, it's not a reason to not do it. It was a reason for me to be less enthusiastic about it, because it means it won't work on the iPad or the iPhone. But I assume that Wolfram probably has a custom viewer app on those platforms. So I think, from what I could see technically, it's equivalent to the Flash plugin. It's a native code plugin that is installed. You install the Windows, Linux, or Mac version, and then it intertwines itself with the browser in order to handle on the browser's behalf display of content of it that's marked as a specific type. So it's actually a very trivial thing to do. It's a bit like the YouTube integration that we've done. Probably doesn't need any core modifications, probably just a matter of an HTML embed element of the right syntax. But I would expect. So you should be good to go with that. The other thing that Nick showed me was something called Frink. Do you want to screen share that and just show us what it is as well?
Yeah. Well, let me get this. Oh yeah, here they are. Screenshot of that. I put a pre-calculation. It has units. Yeah, okay, no. So you might be able to read 60 miles per hour in terms of inches per year is 3 to the 10th, roughly. And so it can do any number of, I mean, there are hundreds of different measurements and temporal units and monetary values, looking up historical stuff on the web back to 1900 for both the UK and the US at least, and estimated, interpolated values for other countries and so forth and so on. It's a marvelous effort on the part of a guy named Alan Eliasson, who has his site has the unlikely name of futureboy.us. And, if you wanted to look at it to get a sense of it, to see whether you think it would be interesting, it would give some real mathematical, and it has infinite precision math as well, as far as, reasonable. On which you could select a section of tiddlers that would demonstrate something. Something you can't.
I wanted to add to the conversation. I have something I can show you guys. I attempted to add the CDF that he was talking about into a TiddlyWiki. Now, granted, I'm not an expert at adding things in, so give me 1 second. What ended up happening?
While you're getting that ready, let me just say, just pick up a couple of points about frink before we go back to CDF. And it's just to say that frink is a Java applet, and so that's, again, it means that it won't work on iPhones and iPads and Android and so on.
Except he has it up on his website as a workable version.
Right, but I mean, we can't put it in a web page on those platforms. But again, for those platforms that support Java, the integration with web stuff is reasonably, is reasonably well developed. So again, I wouldn't see an obstacle to making an integration with TiddlyWiki. But Rich, you're going to show us your CDF attempts. I'm very interested to see.
Yeah, no, actually, it's just a fail. It's just a really quick fail. What I was going to say is that I just did a simple embed, I think using an iframe, and I ran into the issue I think that you were discussing, is that it is an external player. You need to load the content from an external site, and I'm sure that there was something technical I missed when I was doing it. If you look at the code here, it's nothing too complicated. I just wrapped it in an iframe, and I actually tried this a variety of ways, and I still ran into this doesn't exist. So I'm not sure if they're still supporting their web application of this, or if they're moving on to, say, customized or dedicated things inside other worlds.
Okay, well, I mean, there you're embedding an HTML file from their site, and it appears that HTML file doesn't exist. So if you go straight to the URL that the iframe references, what happens?
You run into a similar problem where they actually are telling you that it doesn't work anymore. So give me 1 second. And now that's the page that they tell you to use. So that's the reason that it's confusing and concerning, is that when you go to the Wolfram Alpha page, they say use this page, and when you click on it from the Wolfram site, it takes you to the oops, the page doesn't work anymore. So that's actually where the concern is from my point of view, is that it seems as though Wolfram is moving on from that web-enabled version that anybody can use to potentially maybe embedded versions that an iPad and Android and things like that can use. Something similar to what you were talking about, Jeremy, where you're relying on their their system to do it, whereas you don't have direct control over it, which
Yeah.
is something that TiddlyWiki typically has direct control over almost everything.
Yeah, on their largesse, as it were. Yeah.
Okay, so Jim's been very patiently waiting. I wanted to ask Jim if you were ready to do us a quick run through of the static site generation stuff you've been working on. I think you're one of two people who've been making contributions to the static site stuff. The other is a guy called James Anderson, who's Welford on GitHub, and fortuitously, the two of you are working in slightly different areas at the moment. Welford's recent contributions have been around more flexibility in the folders that static content is stored in, and making it so that links and so on work, which I know is an issue that you've run into as well. But Jim, for people who don't have any experience of Node.js, of course, producing a static version of a site might well be one of the benefits of moving to Node.js. So perhaps you could just run through what you've done and what your goals were. So particularly, perhaps addressing people who are using the single file version and might not have considered the advantages that they might get from rendering static pages.
Okay. Basically, I was just looking for, TiddlyWiki to be an authoring system. You could almost think of it as a simple CMS way to quickly put together a bunch of pages, link between them, and then be able to, when I saw in the documentation that you could generate static sites, static pages from it, I thought, well, that would be great for simple websites like mine, which are just static. And so when I started diving into it, there was at least 3 problems so far I've had to solve. The first one was that tags don't work on the static site, so I got that fixed in applet, and I posted about that on the group. So I've got a way now, and I'm going to try here. This will be my first share. Let's see here. Let's see. I want to share this.
We've found in the past that sharing individual windows doesn't always do what you hope.
Okay.
And it's sometimes better to share the whole screen, particularly sort of file dialogues and stuff.
Let me go to, so this is currently my public website, dullroar.com. I'm dullroar on GitHub. And so this is all being generated from TiddlyWiki. You can probably tell that. And so, but the interesting thing is, like if we go to static pages, on a typical TiddlyWiki that's been generated into static pages, these would highlight as if they were clickable, but they wouldn't be clickable. And so the first work I did was making those clickable, and I posted about that on the group. The other 2 things I've done is I've created 2 plugins. One is to generate an Atom feed for those dinosaurs among us like me who still use feed readers. And so if you click here.
Yay for feed readers, by the way. I still use feedly.com for my RSS needs.
Yes, and so I click there, I get, I'm under Firefox, so it shows me this nice formatted way, but if I do a Control-U, you can see that it's actually the feed XML, the Atom XML. And then the other thing I've done is, because you want search engine optimization to still work, and that's something, if you just pump up like a Tiddly file, is harder. But in a static site, you can tell your search engines, you can register with your Google Webmaster Tools, and Bing has a similar thing, that, hey, here's my sitemap, or you can just put a sitemap out there. And so that's a plugin, and that's also working now. etc. And so that's about where I'm at right now.
So just to go back to that sitemap, for people who aren't familiar with them, it looks like it's explicitly listing each of the pages on the site with some information about how often it gets updated.
Correct. And you can give it different priorities, like, hey, for the search engine, the robots that are crawling, you can say, like, hey, I want my home page to have a very high priority because I'm updating it all the time, maybe. Most things I gave a standard of 0.5, which is just kind of in the middle. It's kind of a 0 to 1. I also give the site index itself an 8.
Okay, so it'll come back and get updated versions of the sitemap.
Right, and you can also hint that, so it gets a last modified date. You can also hint, hey, this page is going to change weekly, monthly, whatever. And so you're basically just passing along hints to any crawler of what's been updated and how often you expect it to be updated, etc.
I have a question about sitemaps. There's something that's always puzzled me. I don't think your site does it, but it's quite common for the homepage of a site to list the content of the most recent N posts, and for those posts to also individually exist as an individual page, as you have them here. Yes, can you go there? So
I do that here. Recent posts.
Right, but you don't. You're listing links to them, not the actual bodies of the posts. So a default WordPress blog would, well, I don't know if it's what it does by default, but a lot of WordPress blogs I've encountered would make it so those top 4 or 5 posts would appear as consecutive tiddlers on dullraw.com. But that I could still go to a specific URL for each page.
Correct. And style differences or whatever, right now, this is kind of where I was looking for, but I think that would also be doable.
Well, the bit that puzzles me is whether there's a way to tell Google which, because it's going to therefore see the index.html as having content in common with each of the 5 post pages, if that makes sense, the pages corresponding to the actual underlying tiddlers. So I was wondering if the sitemap is the way that one tells Google of that relationship between the home page and the individual posts.
I'm not, let me see here, there's what I was looking for. It's a pretty simple, I don't think there is, because I mean basically here's the entire schema.
Okay, so no, it definitely doesn't. Because you see, the problem is that then if I search for a phrase that's in your top story, it would be quite nice to be able to control whether Google sends visitors to dullraw.com or dullraw.com/post URL.
Right.
Okay, well, that remains an unresolved question.
This is, sitemaps are, and there's debate about whether they're even useful and do the spiders even do anything with them anymore. But
have you seen the sitemap being spidered? Do your logs tell you that?
Yes, and you can submit like using Google Webmaster Tools, and like I said, Bing has something too. You can actually tell it, hey, my sitemap is updated. Which I don't do. I've registered that I have them with both of those functions, but I haven't. I don't automatically go out and tell them every time I update a page.
Well, one of the I do. I'm interested in getting all of your work into the core. I mean, as in the tag stuff, the atom feed, and the sitemap. Plus, I think I think it would be quite useful for there to be a sitemap for TiddlyWiki.com itself as well, actually. So very interested in this stuff.
Good.
And I'm sure the plugins I've written can be improved because they're both my first plugins, and so I was kind of learning as I went, and so I'm sure there's things in there where someone else is going to look at them and go, "Oh, why did you do that?" And
well, I mean, I think it's the good thing that I'm really pleased about is to see so much interest in the static site generation stuff, with plenty of brains working on it. I'm sure we'll come out with the best answer in the end. But I must say, what you've been doing so far very much tracks things that I was hoping to see. Nick, I can see you raising your finger very politely. Do please ask your question or make your comment.
Yeah, I was wondering if, in the long run, there were a plugin or series of plugins that would translate from TiddlyWiki to LaTeX. Whether the markup now could be augmented with terms that would end up in the table of contents, a glossary, index, footnotes, and other artifacts that are used by LaTeX.
And it would be quite tricky. So there may be a few kludgy ways that it might be possible to experiment with. So there are tools that, like I think pandoc, that can convert from HTML to LaTeX. And it may be that one could use the existing HTML output, static HTML output options of TiddlyWiki with one of those tools. But
pandoc actually includes both Markdown and two different wiki syntaxes, but neither of them are TW-wiki syntaxes.
Okay. And so that suggests it may be possible to write a parser for pandoc that does understand enough of TiddlyWiki's wiki text format.
I think pandoc is written in Erlang, so I'm not sure, but I think it was a strange language for me. Strange, but I think if you can render HTML from wiki text, I think it would be possible to render to LaTeX. Let's say a simple version, not with all the indexes and cross references and table cross referencing and all this stuff. But I think a very basic LaTeX output would be possible because you can output HTML. So you could, the renderer could output LaTeX too.
Yeah. Well,
So I think it's something that you can just experiment with. I mean, the path there is to start exploring the static HTML output options of TiddlyWiki. There's a good deal of flexibility and control there that may well allow us to massage things to the point where pandoc is happy.
Yeah. Could I ask one other question?
Go for it.
That is, would it be possible to make a foldable output?
That implies, I guess, including LaTeX primitives to do the folding.
No. I mean, just within HTML.
Oh yes, very much so. Yes. When we talk about generating static HTML sites, but those static HTML pages can actually be augmented with JavaScript so that they have behaviors, and that kind of hiding and showing of hierarchical content be exactly the kind of thing that we could do. Jim, was it you or was it James who was exploring in that area? I think it was Welford, actually.
I did a little bit of JavaScript work around. I've been using some of it, yes, but very little right now in the site, but more coming.
So, so Nick, yes, the answer is we can output HTML that incorporates standard JavaScript libraries, jQuery-like things, for exactly that sort of presentation. Before we move too far away from Jim's static site generation, I wanted to show you what Nathan had put into the sidebar. Nathan, I'm assuming you're not microphoned, but if you do have a microphone, this is the moment to speak. But I was just going to show you, it's this link, Sterling Premium Finance. When you look at it, it's a conventional web page. And when I click on, oh, it's not that conventional. Oh, that's very interesting. Despite that scrolling behavior looking a little bit like TiddlyWiki, this is actually a static site generated by TiddlyWiki. So if I go into the developer tools, I think I can see. That you've got some JavaScript going on in here as well, I believe. You got jQuery and yeah, a jQuery scroll to plugin. So I think, Nathan, this is exactly what we were talking about. This is a statically generated site that incorporates a bunch of JavaScript in the generated HTML.
Okay.
And one really cool thing here is that those different JavaScript modules and such that these sites use are actually brought into the system as tiddlers and wrapped up within the TiddlyWiki module system. So they're actually starting to manage their like jQuery versioning and jQuery plugin versioning within TiddlyWiki itself.
So again, Nathan, any documentation or screencasts that you guys are able to produce would be
she's definitely intending to do so. She's planning on it, but she's been quite swamped with actually doing the thing. So.
Well, it's great to see that. I counted earlier there being 2 people in the shape of Jim and James experimenting with static site generation, but of course I was forgetting the power duo of Nathan and Sarah.
And they're also starting to move now towards, they've got a couple of other sort of pure static sites that are going to be launching, and they're basically starting to set up now for their plans of their .NET integrations with the TiddlyWiki CMS. So I'm really looking forward to see how that comes out and comes together, because that's going to be very cool is to see their enterprise components sort of start to come into this world.
That's awesome. I mean, I must say, all of this activity around static sites, would really love it to be more visible, and that partly means probably updating tiddlywiki.com so we've got better pointers to it. But I think I shouldn't read too much into the fact that there's 3 of you interested in this stuff and working on it, but it does start to look as though TiddlyWiki is shaping up, as I'd hoped, as a viable option for these sort of site builds. The results look great.
I would go ahead and start reading into that. I mean, I think I see a very promising direction here, and I think that there's just going to be more and more people who sort of start to have that realization.
Because I mean, looking at your stuff, you've got on this Sterling Premium Finance site, the jQuery is being called via a remote script tag. But I can also see how you've got the JavaScript, you've got a JavaScript plugin, the scroll to plugin, which is being integrated in line, which I guess means that's you demonstrating an alternative to Grunt, I think would be a tool typically used to concatenate these things together. I can also see that you've got a script tag with some JSON format linked data in. These are topics of great interest to other people as well.
They're starting to head in some awesome directions with this stuff, and I'm pretty excited.
Yeah, no, that's really great to see. Really great. Okay, so now, is there anything else anybody's got stored up to say from any of the previous things that we've discussed? We've got sort of half an hour, so that's enough time to open up another topic. But as I say, I just wanted to first check if there was anybody with the desperate need to go back to anything.
Jeremy, I only checked pandoc.org, and it's Haskell, the language.
Haskell.
So.
Well, lots of people I know adore Haskell, so maybe that's a fun weekend project for somebody to write the TiddlyWiki parser in Haskell. But actually, I mean, in a language like Haskell, I think the TiddlyWiki Wikitext parser would be one of the easier things to write. If we get, if Astrid manages to adapt to the Railroad plugin for showing other bits of TiddlyWiki Wikitext syntax, that may actually help get us some of the way to a concise expression of the Wikitext syntax that can be transformed into other representations. Okay, cool. The thing I had on my list to talk about that I don't think we will talk about because I don't think there's enough time is TiddlyDesktop. So we are now 6 weeks or so into the new feature moratorium, and I think that's been going really well. By the way, the new feature moratorium, it's been great for me to get on with other things, and I'm really happy to see that it hasn't, I don't think, slowed down, appreciably slowed down the innovation around TiddlyWiki, because it's so easy for people to hack on the core, without needing to extend the core first. But nonetheless, TiddlyDesktop is what I have spent, I think, the 3 weeks before I went on holiday on. I showed the new version briefly at the last Hangout, and there's been some more discussion recently in the groups about other people trying experiments with getting TiddlyWiki working under Node WebKit. In fact, this static site generation thing is also relevant because one of the things that would be quite easy to do in TiddlyDesktop is to have a publish button by your wiki that does all of the grunt work to publish a static version of the content. So it gives us a way of making a bunch of the functionality that's currently relatively arcane and only accessible under Node.js available for desktop users. And yeah, so I think I said this before really, I'm really excited about TiddlyDesktop. By incorporating TiddlyWiki itself within TiddlyDesktop, it means that TiddlyDesktop itself can be as customizable as TiddlyWiki itself. And thinking back to what we were saying about the strengths of TiddlyWiki, I think bringing this customizability a bit further outwards so that we're customizing the way in which TiddlyWiki documents are interacted with gives us some really good, interesting options. So one of the things I'm interested in is in the same way that we think of TiddlyWiki, people who are TiddlyWiki authors producing TiddlyWiki documents that are for other people to use, a TiddlyWiki user ought to be able to produce in the future a customized version of TiddlyDesktop for their users to use. And it should be just as easy for them to customize that version of TiddlyDesktop as it is for them to customize TiddlyWiki itself. So if you think about one of the big users of TiddlyWiki at the moment is embed, the adolescent mental health project that we've talked about several times in Hangouts, and there's also a presentation on tiddlywiki.com about it. And one of the issues that project grapples with is the browsers that there's still a lot of IE6 and 7 browsers in the health service. We can actually make TiddlyDesktop run on Windows XP, and provide a consistent experience on Windows XP. That means that we could, with an ambit, we could produce something that looks like a desktop application that's very ambit specific, so the application having an ambit icon and so on, that just reuses all the save functionality and so on of TiddlyDesktop itself. Sorry, I've not explained that very clearly. Hi.
Hi, I just wanted to ask you if you have a little time to explain about the architectural difference of the new TiddlyWiki version 004.
I'd really love to. I mean, maybe it could be the... Oh, sorry, you were going to say because...
Yeah, because I have tried to run it on Windows, and in the small lucky occasions when it worked, it was very slow.
Very slow? What was slow?
Yes. How slow was the opening of TiddlyDesktop application itself, and then the opening of TiddlyWiki inside.
Ooh, well, that's very interesting. I haven't done a whole heap of testing on Windows, and I still have this backlog, but I'm aware that there are messages on the discussion list about problems that people have been having with TiddlyDesktop on Windows. So that's one of the things I hope to pick up again this week, is to do some testing on Windows and try and sort that out. Certainly, performance is fine on the Mac, so I'm assuming that there's one or more problems with the Windows version. But let me screen share and demo it.
And I also couldn't even start it on Linux. I
don't do any testing on Linux at all, but rely on other people to do so. So, so initially, I didn't actually publish the Linux version until somebody else had confirmed that they were able to get it working. But it's possible that I ought to install some version of Linux in a virtual machine. Anyway, that was running the application. You can see the main window is similar to what it was before. There's the cat logo, a button to add a TiddlyWiki file. If I click that button, it brings up a file dialog, and I can somehow find a TiddlyWiki file to add. Let's add the dev edition. Actually, that's a... I've just realized I really shouldn't add that version because I don't want to change that. Excuse me. I'll just add the pre-release. Right, sorry, so very tediously, you've just seen me add a file twice. But you can see that the functionality so far is much the same as on the old version. As soon as I add the file, it opens, I can close it. There's a thumbnail image, I can reopen it, I can make a change, and you can see the save notification. And now if I close and reopen the wiki, you can see that new tiddler that I just created. So the differences include this toolbar on the main window. So we've got a help window, which brings up the tabbed table of contents with, at the moment, very, very sketchy documentation. The documentation is mainly, there's details about the way that backups work. The way that backups work is exposed in Control Panel, which is another separate window, where you can specify a path for the backups. Now, in my case, I've set all the backups to go to that folder, users Jeremy Ruston Tiddly Backups, followed by the file path of the TiddlyWiki file this is being saved. So that means that if I open this guy and reveal the backup folder, you can see that for that dev wiki, the backup folder, scroll back, we've got inside Tiddly Backups, we've then got uses Jeremy Ruston, Git, Germaline, So that is a repetition of the path that leads to the location of the document. So the purpose of all of this is that you get to choose whether to have all of your backups in one place. So if I modify this file as well, adding a new tiddler, and now if you look at the backups, you'll see that now there's a backup entry for index.html as well as for dev/index.html. The alternative is that one can set the backup path to be just file name and backup, and so now if I do a modification, I'll get a subfolder called index.html_backup containing all of the backups. Not sure that I've explained that very clearly, but
yeah, okay.
Hopefully,
looks very handy.
And it's a bit clumsy, I do think, the way that it's configured. Then in the actual wiki windows, we've also got a toolbar. We've got back and forwards buttons, which obviously they're only really useful if you turn on the navigation options. So now, hopefully, if I navigate to a tiddler or two, and then go back, yeah, it does, as a browser would, jumps between the we've got reveal backup folder, which I showed you, and open dev tools, which opens what are called the jailbroken dev tools that are just on the contained TiddlyWiki document. So this is a bit confusing. Those dev tools, so the root of them is within is the TiddlyWiki document. But if I click on the toolbar and click F12, then I get dev tools on what I call the host window, which is the window that embeds an iframe that contains the actual TiddlyWiki document. So this is where the toolbar is. Yeah, those toolbar buttons. So you quite often you get into this strange recursion where you're not. It gets confusing whether you should be looking at the dev tools for the document or the dev tools for the window. And finally, the Backstage button brings up the TiddlyWiki that is inside TiddlyDesktop. So if we look here, those two wikis that I added, they exist as tiddlers here. So the title of the tiddler is the path name to the document. And if we go to look at the system tiddlers as well, you can see that there's, for instance, the thumbnails are also stored as individual tiddlers. So if I, as an experiment, if I delete this tiddler, so that's the one corresponding to the dev wiki that I added, you'll see that automatically it will disappear from that window. So the actual wiki list window itself is just a tiddler within the Backstage TiddlyWiki. So I could add another wiki. I'll add the dev wiki back again, and it does what it always does. Opens the dev wiki, and you can see it appears both in the wiki list folder here within the Backstage wiki, and here within the main window of TiddlyDesktop. So in effect, not in effect, what's actually going on is that main window is this tiddler displayed in a standalone window. So the Backstage wiki, you don't normally open this window that I'm looking at here, which is the wiki itself. Normally you just see individual tiddlers. So for instance, the help tiddler is again taken from in here. So if the documentation is actually within a shadow tiddler, but if I just...
Can anyone edit the backstage?
anyone can
mode.
click on the backstage button. Yeah, is that what you mean?
Yeah, if anyone can edit the TiddlyWiki, that is the whole.
Yeah, if you go into the backstage
configuration.
wiki, then there's nothing to stop you breaking things. I was just going to show how if I edit this shadow tiddler of the backup help, and as soon as I press done, you can see that window changes. So yes, the backstage wiki is all of the logic of TiddlyDesktop lives in this backstage wiki. It's how we produce all of the user interface components of TiddlyDesktop itself. If I just switch over to the code very briefly to show you a couple of things, there's a TiddlyDesktop plugin that contains, in fact, all of the standard content of the Backstage wiki, including a couple of modules. The new startup module that responds to a number of messages on the root widget. So, for instance, opening when I did that reveal backup folder, that is using one of these messages that can open a folder in the Finder or Explorer. There's also a widget called the WikiFrame widget, which embeds an iframe with the settings to allow a TiddlyWiki document hosted in the iframe to operate. So it, for instance, traps the save requests of that wiki so that the TiddlyDesktop handles them. So what that's showing you is that in order for all of this to work, basically made a few very minor tweaks to TiddlyWiki itself, such as being able to host an iframe containing a TiddlyWiki, and the ability to not only display the entire Backstage wiki in a window, but also the ability to display individual tiddlers within a separate window. So that means with this mechanism, basically anything that you can make in a TiddlyWiki tiddler, you can make into a standalone window. And windows in Node WebKit have options that we're not currently using, that, for instance, you can make a window that doesn't have those buttons, or a window that's always on top, so it just sort of sits there even when you're working on other windows. So I think this will give us a lot of flexibility to be able to create novel user interfaces.
Jeremy, these single tiddlers, can they be open in edit mode and saved back?
No, the window, well, I mean, they could be, but by default, the window is showing the tiddler not through the view template. It's showing it sort of nakedly, so to speak.
Okay. Now, because I was thinking about something like sticky notes, so you could open a single tiddler and just throw in some notes, and it's maybe always on top or always open, so like there.
So exactly that, and then those notes would be stored in the Backstage wiki, and then perhaps there'd be a way to move those notes into an individual wiki hosted within TiddlyDesktop.
Okay, yeah.
Jeremy, sorry, are you going to look at the questions?
Oh, perhaps we should. Whilst I'm just flicking over to them, should say hello to Eric. Welcome, Eric. How are you doing? Are you microphoned up and able to introduce yourself?
Good morning. I'm Eric Schulman, author of Tiddly Tools and Inside TiddlyWiki, and I'm here.
Great to have you here, Eric. Just before I switched over to you, Branimir was asking about questions, and there is a question in the Q&A panel that I should answer. But before I do, would you like to give us a final update on your appeal for Inside TiddlyWiki, the missing manual?
Well, I can give you a little bit of a summary. The campaign to raise funds raised 38% of the target goal through Indiegogo. So that came out to $2,850, which is a sizable sum, but unfortunately not nearly as much as was needed to sort of make this a complete viable success. But we're still going to proceed ahead anyway. In addition, there was some funds that were contributed outside of Indiegogo as well, so that the net result was that we hit roughly 50% of the fundraising goal, including the stuff that was done outside of Indiegogo. I am currently sorry, I've got some background chatter going here. Let me just close something. I'm sorry. I'm currently working on the outline for the first part of Inside TiddlyWiki, the introductory sort of getting started with TiddlyWiki introduction stuff, and I'll be posting that to the Inside TiddlyWiki discussion group shortly. I also sent out the invites to everybody on the group, but I think something has happened because nobody has responded to them, so I think I might have messed up, and I'm going to just send them again. Because because that's the first time. Because it's like I have a list of 54 email addresses, and there's a bulk invite mechanism, but I think I just might not have put it in correctly or something, and it just. But whatever it was. So anyway, so I'm working on the outline. We're going to get the folks starting to participate in the discussion group, and that. That the outline will basically just start to grow into becoming the actual writing. So that's where things are at the moment, and we'll have to see how things go. Now, I do still have more fundraising we can do outside of Indiegogo, because I still have my regular fundraising that I had out, the existing fundraising appeal that I had, and so I might try to keep the sort of fundraising effort in sort of an ongoing cycle. And see what can be done to keep the writing going. Because as it stands right now, I have about a month's worth of time to focus on writing. But I still have to, bring in other revenue, so it's going to be a sort of a part-time thing beyond that. But if we can continue to bring in funds, then I can continue. Then that's the other revenue, and I don't have to divide my attention onto other things.
Okay. So, Eric.
Yes.
You could set up a link or something so that you could buy into the discussion group. So I don't know for $500 or something like this. No. So I think it would be good to have a button so there is the ongoing buy me into the discussion group.
Well, the discussion group is only $10. That was the minimum contribution. So
now or something like this.
Yeah. So, but in the long run, what really has to happen is there has to be TiddlyWiki consulting that people are going to be needing. That there has to be a viable business model here for actually generating revenue from TiddlyWiki work itself. I mean, the book is all wonderful, and it's something that has to happen, and it's very valuable, and and it's really important to the community that this exists. But in the long run, economic viability is not based upon getting advances from people to write a book. It's based upon TiddlyWiki itself being a commercially viable generator of revenue, which means providing. And this is I don't want to digress too far, but what TiddlyWiki needs is a really good business application, the killer business app that's implemented using TiddlyWiki that explains to people how they can make money or save money in their business by using TiddlyWiki, and that will make the commercially viable model.
Indeed. The this is a topic I think we'll be coming back to on many of the Hangouts this year. But certainly I'd like to mark the success of the campaign a 50% payback sounds, could sound like it wasn't a success, but there's something that Eric and I, when I was talking to him about it, grappled with for a long time was what the initial target should be. So, what the campaign ended up raising was 50% of a guess. And I think it's a pretty good result to have got thousands of dollars out of thin air on the basis of something that you said you were going to do. I mean, it's a pretty cool result, and I'm very, very pleased that the community reached so deep.
I want to sort of concur with that exactly. That the campaign was a success. The only concern here is how much of the actual book can be produced, given the time frame and the funding and whatnot. So,
but that's,
that was always the premise. Was that no matter how much is produced, it's always going to be of value. So.
And then, but however much was raised, it's always going to run out, and
exactly.
it's your lifetime's work to write the book.
Well, the reality here is that I probably have in my head about a year's worth of writing.
Mm.
In terms of all the different sort of things that I outlined as extended goals of the campaign,
exactly.
All of those things, and they're all very valuable things to create. So. Yes, if I went out and did a lottery ticket and suddenly became independently wealthy, I would be spending a year of my time writing TiddlyWiki books, and more than a year, but at least that much time, clearly. So, and if I could do that, I would do that.
Indeed, and let's hope that the conditions.
So, if anyone wants to buy me a lottery ticket,
Nick, I think you're hoping to ask something. Nick? Oh no, Nick, you're on mute actually. But look, I think that I should answer Branimir's question. So Branimir is saying, I suggest to hide title matches from all matches during search. This currently just creates a duplicate tiddler list. And let me just screen share in order to explain what the problem is that Branimir is talking about. If I search for the word filter, for instance, or filters, you can see that I get at the top 2 title matches. So those are tiddlers with the word filters in the title, and then a list of all matches. And Branimir is pointing out that these 2 tiddlers, changes and filters, also appear in the list, and he's asking whether they shouldn't be removed because it's redundant that they appear under all matches when they've already appeared as title matches. Is that right, Branimir? That's the...
Yeah, exactly.
So this was done deliberately. I at first did it exactly as you suggested and removed the title matches from the list of all matches. What I found though was that it was confusing in a slightly unexpected way. That I'm not sure if this is a great example, but I found that the way that I actually used it was to scan through all matches and to be confused that an entry appeared to be out of order. So for me, it impeded the being able to scan the search results sequentially. I guess that it maybe what it really points to is that having 2 separate lists is a bit clumsy. You could also imagine highlighting that link and that link so that the title links are easier to see, perhaps, so that they're highlighted. But I would encourage you to experiment with it and see what you think. But as I say, it is, for what it's worth, deliberate at the moment.
Could I ask a question about search?
Yes, please, Nick.
In search in Firefox, every instance of found words are highlighted.
Yeah.
However, you have to find them manually within tiddlers.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was just saying in the chat sidebar. If we just highlight the search term in the one all list and just have the all list, then it becomes immediately clear which of those in the list have the search term in that title.
It could just be bold.
I mean, in the text.
Yes. We don't highlight search results in the text of Open Tiddlers. It's quite a. I mean, TiddlyWiki Classic did. TiddlyWiki Classic, controversially, when you do a search, it closes all the open tiddlers and open the matching tiddlers and highlights them. When you look at TiddlyWiki 5, it's not really clear how that highlighting would work. I mean, whether I assume it possibly any text in the main story river, maybe that's where we'd apply the highlights. But obviously the tiddlers that are open in the story river don't necessarily have the search term, the current search term in TiddlyWiki 5.
Jeremy?
Hi.
Yeah, a question. Not related to highlighting the search term specifically, but are we moving in the direction of suggesting that the two lists, the list of title matches first, separate from the all matches, are we sort of talking about eliminating the title matches and just sort of somehow highlighting them within the all matches list?
I think that is one of the things that's being proposed.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to suggest that approach would be problematic. Consider sometimes when I'm looking for a tiddler, let's say there's many, many tiddlers in this document, and I know that the title contains a certain bit of text, and I go and I search for that bit of text because there's maybe a dozen or more titles that contain it, but there could be hundreds of tiddlers that contain that piece of text in the body, and that I'm really looking for a tiddler by title. And so if those dozen
I agree wholeheartedly.
were stuffed into 100 other results, it becomes very difficult to find what I'm looking for.
So the current approach of pulling the title matches to the top seems, if we're going to do anything with the title matches, I think we need to do that, because it's bringing them to the top that highlights them and makes them easiest to refer to. So the issue remains the one that Branimir originally raised, which is whether those title matches should also appear in the list of all matches. I mean, if they didn't, then the label should say all matches excluding title matches. It's certainly easier to explain it being all matches.
I'm not bothered by the redundancy.
I don't have the problem. I don't see the problem. What's the problem if it's doubled? There is, in my opinion, there's absolutely no problem that it's there two times. So if you don't click it in the body and you scroll down and you want to click it in the all searches or in the all match, then you click it there. And if you click it two times, you get two times the same tiddler. So I don't see any problem.
I usually search by title or any word of a title of a tiddler, and they usually come up. But then I see it somewhere in the all matches, and it's covered with other titles that have the same word. And then it becomes a huge mess, because it all depends on, everybody has a different view, because all depends on how you are searching. If you're intending to search only within the contents or the other columns or other fields of a tiddler, then it's okay, you will be looking at all searches. But I usually, and this is my approach, I remember the titles, and I search by titles because I have a lot of titles and they are like sentences.
As a suggestion,
if you do that, you'll see how it works.
As a suggestion, back in the classic days, I had a plugin called Search Options plugin, and one of the things it did was provide extended options for searching, including deciding which things to search by. And there was an option for whether the title should be mixed in or listed at the top, etc. But I could see a simpler interface that simply said, you want to search by title, And like you're saying, you're searching by title. That's what your intention is. And what if the interface was more explicit in that regard, and it had a search, but it had options, which allowed you checkboxes for which kinds of searches to do. And if you search by title, you will get a separate list of titles. If you say search by all text, then you'll get separate by all text, and it'll become clear that the results are based on what you're asked for. As opposed to trying to be all things to everybody all the time, it'll be more pick your flavor.
I'm afraid, in fact, I come to the end of my time for today, so I'm going to leave that one. I mean, basically, Branimir, it's a fair question. I think if any proposal to change this, it would be good to see a prototype and to let other people experiment with it. The key thing for me is that we some time ago added the ability for custom search tabs. So the way that search results are displayed is highly customizable already, and this is, I think, a question of what the default should be. And as Nathan pointed out in the sidebar, as such discussions tend to be, it's rather has the shape of one can't have one's cake and eat it. It's hard to come up with a default that works for everybody. Branimir's just said best is if we could customize the default. The customizability at the moment comes from dropping in a new search result tab. So if you wanted something different, you'd install this other tab, and then you would have that tab as your default tab. So have a look at custom search results on tiddlywiki.com to see how that's done if you want to experiment with that. Okay, so 2 minutes before we close. Any final thoughts, comments, questions before we close?
Yes, if Eric wants help with the book, I would be happy to help.
That's a great offer, and
I welcome all folks who want to contribute both their thoughts, and if you have a particular area that you wanted to write something about, certainly I'm not averse to having sort of co-authors in a sense, or contributing authors, as it were. So yes, if there's something in particular that you find of interest, that you feel that you have a very good way of explaining, but the first step is I'm going to be posting up an outline of what the general hierarchy of topics and such. And I'm sure within that there'll be areas where I might have left out some things that you can suggest, or if there's an area where you say, oh, that's something that I really am interested in, you might want to take that part and run with it or whatever, and we'll figure that out as the outline sort of gels a bit more over the next, say, week or two.
Yes.
Guys, so for me, it's to say thank you very much for giving up your time today. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to cover everything that that we'd like to in the session. I am aware that I've already raised this idea of having a weekly hangout. A weekend hangout, and I will try and make some suggestions for when we can do that. But expect another regular hangout 78 next week. And as I say, many thanks to everybody for coming along, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the groups and in GitHub over the next week as I catch up with my backlog, and look forward to hopefully seeing you here next week as well. Many thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.